renders it easy for her to ascertain whether this be so or not. And it is so, for the passenger not to be missed twice arrives among the rest.
"Now let me see what becomes of you. Go on."
An observation addressed to the air, and yet it might be addressed to the passenger, so compliantly does he go on along the High Street until he comes to an arched gateway, at which he unexpectedly vanishes. The poor soul quickens her pace, is swift and close upon him entering under the gateway, but only sees a postern staircase on one side of it, and on the other side an ancient vaulted room, in which a large-headed, grey-haired gentleman is writing, under the odd circumstances of sitting open to the thoroughfare, and eyeing all who pass, as if he were toll-taker of the gateway, though the way is free. "Halloa!" he cries in a low voice, seeing her brought to a standstill. "Who are you looking for?"
"There was a gentleman passed in here this minute, sir."
"Of course there was. What do you want with him?"
"Where do he live, dearie?"
"Live? Up that staircase."
"Bless ye! Whisper. What's his name, dearie?"
"Surname? Jasper. Christian name? John. Mr. John Jasper."
"Has he a calling, good gentleman?"
"Calling? Yes. Sings in the choir."
"In the spire?"
"Choir."
"What's that?"
Mr. Datchery rises from his papers and comes to his doorstep. "Do you know what a cathedral is?" he asks jocosely. The woman nods. "What is it?" She looks puzzled, casting about in her mind to find a definition, when it occurs to her that it is easier to point out the substantial object itself, massive against the dark blue sky and the early stars. "That's the answer. Go in there at 7 to-morrow morning, and you may see Mr. John Jasper, and hear him too."
"Thank'ee. Thank'ee."
The burst of triumph in which she thanks him does not escape the notice of the single buffer of an easy temper living idly on his means. He glances at her, clasps his hands behind him, as the wont of such buffers is, and lounges along the echoing precincts at her side. "Or," he suggests with a backward hitch of his head, "you can go up at once to Mr. Jasper's rooms there." The woman eyes him with a cunning smile, and shakes her head. "Oh, you don't want to speak to him?" She repeats her dumb reply, and forms with her lips a soundless "No." "You can admire him at a distance 3 times a day, whenever you like. It's a long way to come for that, though." The woman looks up quickly. If Mr. Datchery thinks she is to be so induced to declare where she comes from, he is of a much easier temper than she is. But she acquits him of such an artful thought, as he lounges along, like the chartered boor of the city, with his uncovered grey hair blowing about, and his purposeless hands rattling the loose money in the pockets of his trousers. The chink of the money has an attraction for her greedy ears.
"Wouldn't you help me to pay for my travellers' lodgings, dear gentleman, and to pay my way along? I am a poor soul, I am indeed, and troubled with a grievous cough."
"You know the travellers' lodgings, I perceive, and are making directly for it," is Mr. Datchery's bland comment, still rattling his loose money. "Been here often, my good woman?"
"Once in all my life."
"Ay, ay?" They have arrived at the entrance to the Monk's Vineyard. An appropriate remembrance, presenting an exemplary model for imitation, is revived in the woman's mind by the sight of the place. She stops at the gate, and says energetically,
by this token, though you mayn't believe it, that a young gentleman gave me 3 and 6pence, as I was coughing my breath away on this very grass. I asked him for 3 and 6pence, and he gave it me."
"Wasn't it a little cool to name your sum?" hints Mr. Datchery, still rattling. "Isn't it customary to leave the amount open? Mightn't it have had the appearance to the young gentleman, only the appearance, that he was rather dictated to?"
"Look'ee here, dearie,"
she replies in a confidential and persuasive tone.
"I wanted the money to lay it out on a medicine as does me good, and as I deal in. I told the young gentleman so, and he gave it me, and I laid it out honest to the last brass farthing. I want to lay out the same sum in the same way now, and if you'll give it me, I'll lay it out honest to the last brass farthing again, upon my soul."
"What's the medicine?"
"I'll be honest with you beforehand, as well as after. It's opium."
Mr. Datchery, with a sudden change of countenance, gives her a sudden look.
"It's opium, dearie, neither more nor less. And it's like a human creature so far, that you always hear what can be said against it, but seldom what can be said in its praise."
Mr. Datchery begins very slowly to count out the sum demanded of him. Greedily watching his hands, she continues to hold forth on the great example set him.
"It was last Christmas Eve, just arter dark, the once that I was here afore, when the young gentleman gave me the 3 and 6.
Mr. Datchery stops in his counting, finds he has counted wrong, shakes his money together, and begins again.
"And the young gentleman's name,"
she adds,
"was Edwin."
Mr. Datchery drops some money, stoops to pick it up, and reddens with the exertion as he asks, "How do you know the young gentleman's name?"
"I asked him for it, and he told it me. I only asked him the 2 questions. What was his christened name, and whether he'd a sweetheart? And he answered, Edwin, and he hadn't."
Mr. Datchery pauses with the selected coins in his hand, rather as if he were falling into a brown study of their value, and couldn't bear to part with them. The woman looks at him distrustfully, and with her anger brewing for the event of his thinking better of the gift, but he bestows it on her, as if he were abstracting his mind from the sacrifice, and with many servile thanks she goes her way. John Jasper's lamp is kindled, and his lighthouse is shining, when Mr. Datchery returns alone towards it. As mariners on a dangerous voyage, approaching an iron-bound coast, may look along the beams of the warning light to the haven lying beyond it that may never be reached, so Mr. Datchery's wistful gaze is directed to this beacon and beyond. His object in now revisiting his lodging is merely to put on the hat which seems so superfluous an article in his wardrobe. It is 10:30 by the cathedral clock when he walks into the precincts again. He lingers and looks about him, as though the enchanted hour when Mr. Durdles may be stoned home having struck, he had some expectation of seeing the imp who is appointed to the mission of stoning him. In effect, that power of evil is abroad. Having nothing living to stone at the moment, he is discovered by Mr. Datchery in the unholy office of stoning the dead through the railings of the churchyard. The imp finds this a relishing and piquing pursuit, firstly, because their resting place is announced to be sacred, and secondly, because the tall headstones are sufficiently